Madison Chun sat perfectly still in the school bathroom, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. Long strands of black hair lay scattered across the cold tile floor around her feet like fallen autumn leaves. Her once waist-length hair now hung in jagged, uneven chunks barely reaching her shoulders. The bullies had been thorough in their cruelty, each snip of the scissors designed to humiliate and break her spirit. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What they didn't know was that Madison had spent the last 12 years of her life learning the ancient art of Shotokan karate. Her grandfather's dojo in San Francisco had been her second home, where silence and discipline had forged her into something far more dangerous than her quiet demeanor suggested. The same hands that trembled as she touched her ruined hair had broken wooden boards with ease just that morning during her preschool training session. The bathroom door creaked open, and laughter echoed off the walls as 3 girls entered, still admiring their handiwork. Madison's dark eyes met theirs in the mirror, and for just a moment, something flickered behind her calm expression. Something that made the leader, Brittany Walsh, take an unconscious step backward. Madison stood up slowly, brushing the hair from her shoulders with movements that seemed almost choreographed. She had always believed in resolving conflicts peacefully, just as her grandfather had taught her. But as she looked at the destruction of something that had taken years to grow, something that connected her to her late grandmother's memory, a different lesson from the dojo surfaced in her mind. Sometimes respect could only be earned through strength. 3 weeks earlier, Madison Chun had arrived at Roosevelt High School in Portland, Oregon, carrying nothing but a worn backpack and the weight of starting over in a new city. Her mother, Dr. Sarah Chun, had accepted a position at Oregon Health Sciences University, requiring them to leave behind everything familiar in San Francisco. The move meant leaving her grandfather's dojo, her training partners, and the only community that had ever truly understood her. Madison had always been what teachers politely called reserved. While other students chatted loudly in hallways or gathered in social clusters, she preferred the quiet corners of libraries and the solitude of her own thoughts. Her striking appearance often drew attention she didn't want. Her mixed Asian and European heritage had given her distinctive features, and her hair, inherited from her Chinese grandmother, fell in a sleek black cascade that reached nearly to her waist. The hair was more than just genetics to Madison. Every morning, she would carefully braid it the way her grandmother had taught her during their last summer together before cancer took her away. The ritual was a connection to family, to tradition, and to the woman who had first encouraged her to find strength in stillness. Roosevelt High was a sprawling complex of red brick buildings that housed nearly 2,000 students from across Portland's diverse neighborhoods. As Madison walked through the main entrance on her first morning, she immediately sensed the unspoken hierarchies that governed teenage social structures. Athletes clustered near the trophy cases, theater students gathered by the auditorium doors, and academic achievers claimed tables in the library commons. Madison found herself naturally gravitating toward empty spaces, content to observe rather than participate. During lunch, she sat alone in the courtyard, reading a book about Japanese martial arts philosophy, while other students formed their predictable social circles around her. It was during this first lunch period that she caught the attention of Brittany Walsh, a junior who had ruled Roosevelt's social landscape since freshman year. Brittany possessed the kind of effortless confidence that came from never having faced real adversity. Her father owned 3 successful restaurants in downtown Portland. Her mother was a prominent real estate agent, and Brittany herself had been homecoming princess for 2 years running. Brittany thrived on attention and control, carefully curating her image as someone who was both popular and untouchable. She had built her reputation by identifying those she perceived as different or vulnerable, then systematically undermining them through calculated social manipulation. Her methods were sophisticated, spreading rumors disguised as concern, organizing subtle exclusions that appeared accidental, and creating situations where her targets would appear awkward or foolish in front of others. From across the courtyard, Brittany studied Madison with the calculating gaze of a predator sizing up potential prey. The new girl's obvious solitude, her expensive-looking but understated clothing, and most notably, her stunning hair that seemed to catch sunlight like black silk, all marked her as someone who might threaten Brittany's carefully maintained position at the center of attention. "Who's the girl with the prince's hair?" Brittany asked her closest followers, Chloe Martinez and Ashley Thompson, both of whom had learned that agreeing with Brittany was essential to maintaining their own social status. Chloe, who had been desperately trying to grow her own hair past her shoulders for 2 years, felt a stab of envy as she watched Madison's graceful movements. "Probably thinks she's better than everyone else," she muttered, though Madison had never spoken to or even looked at any of them. Ashley, whose own insecurities about her appearance made her quick to criticize others, added, "She's definitely trying too hard with that whole mysterious thing. It's so fake." What none of them knew was that Madison's quiet demeanor had nothing to do with arrogance or pretense. Since the age of 6, she had spent every morning before school in her grandfather's dojo, learning not just the physical techniques of karate, but the mental discipline that came with it. Master Chun, her grandfather, was a 7th-degree black belt who had immigrated from Taiwan in the 1970s, bringing with him the traditional values of respect, humility, and inner strength. True power, he had often told Madison, is not in the ability to harm others, but in the wisdom to know when that ability should be used. Madison's training had been comprehensive and demanding. She had earned her black belt at 14, an achievement that required not only physical skill, but also demonstration of character and leadership. Her grandfather had taught her that martial arts were primarily about self-defense and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Violence was always a last resort, to be used only when all other options had been exhausted. During her 2nd week at Roosevelt, Madison established a routine that kept her largely invisible to most students. She arrived early to school, spending the extra time in the library or helping teachers prepare for their first classes. During lunch, she found a quiet spot in the school's garden area, where she could practice meditation techniques her grandfather had taught her. This routine caught the attention of Mr. David Rodriguez, Roosevelt's physical education teacher, and the school's unofficial martial arts instructor. Mr. Rodriguez had been teaching at Roosevelt for 15 years and had seen thousands of students pass through the halls. He prided himself on recognizing potential in unlikely places, and something about Madison's precise movements and controlled posture suggested a background in martial arts. During a mandatory fitness assessment in P class, Madison's abilities became more apparent to those paying attention. While other students struggled with basic flexibility and strength tests, Madison moved through each exercise with fluid grace and obvious experience. Her balance was exceptional, her core strength evident, and her focus absolute. Mr. Rodriguez made a mental note to speak with Madison privately, but before he could arrange a meeting, Madison had been hoping to avoid finding her in the most unexpected way. It started with small things that Madison initially dismissed as coincidence. Her locker, which she always secured carefully, would sometimes be found slightly ajar when she returned from class. Her textbooks would be moved to different positions in her backpack. Her lunch would occasionally disappear from the cafeteria table where she always sat. Madison's grandfather had taught her that most conflicts could be resolved through patience and understanding. When someone acted aggressively, it usually came from their own pain or insecurity. Her first instinct was to ignore these minor irritations, assuming they would stop if she didn't react. But Brittany Walsh was not someone who gave up easily once. She had chosen a target. Madison's failure to respond to the subtle harassment only convinced Brittany that the new girl was either oblivious or believed herself too good to acknowledge what was happening. Either interpretation fueled Brittany's determination to escalate her campaign. The psychological warfare intensified during Madison's third week. Anonymous notes would appear in her locker, criticizing her appearance, her clothes, or simply telling her she didn't belong at Roosevelt. During group projects, Madison would find herself mysteriously excluded from teams, forcing her to work alone while other students whispered and glanced in her direction. Madison continued to endure these attacks with the stoic patience her grandfather had instilled in her. She focused on her studies, maintained her morning training routine at a local dojo she had found near their new apartment, and tried to believe that the situation would resolve itself naturally. What she didn't realize was that her peaceful response was being interpreted as weakness by Brittany and her followers. In their minds, Madison's failure to fight back proved she was an easy target who would eventually break under pressure. The situation reached a critical point during Madison's fourth week at Roosevelt. She had just finished her lunch and was walking toward the library when she overheard Brittany talking loudly to a group of students near the water fountains. I feel sorry for her, Brittany was saying, her voice dripping with false sympathy. She obviously doesn't understand how things work here. Someone should probably explain to her that walking around like you're better than everyone else isn't going to make you any friends. Madison paused, recognizing that she was the subject of the conversation. Several students turned to look at her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to embarrassment on her behalf. For the first time since arriving at Roosevelt, Madison felt a flash of genuine anger. She had done nothing to provoke this treatment, except exit quietly in the same space as these people. Her grandfather's teachings about patience and understanding suddenly felt inadequate in the face of such deliberate cruelty. But instead of confronting Brittany directly, Madison simply continued walking toward the library, her expression unchanged. She had learned long ago that showing emotion would only encourage bullies to push harder. What Madison didn't see was the calculating look that crossed Brittany's face as she watched her walk away. The new girl's continued indifference was becoming a personal challenge, and Brittany Walsh had never been one to back away from a challenge. That afternoon, as Madison gathered her things from her locker at the end of the school day, she found herself thinking about her grandmother's stories about resilience during difficult times. Her grandmother had faced real hardships, poverty, discrimination, and the challenges of building a new life in a foreign country. These teenage social dynamics seemed trivial in comparison. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But as Madison walked toward the bus stop, her long hair catching the afternoon sunlight, she had no way of knowing that Brittany Walsh was already planning something far more serious than anonymous notes or whispered insults. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everything Madison had learned about strength, restraint, and the sometimes thin line between them. The confrontation came on a Tuesday morning during the brief 10-minute break between second and third periods. Madison was at her locker, carefully organizing her chemistry textbook when she felt someone approach from behind. She turned to find Brittany Walsh standing uncomfortably close, flanked by Chloe and Ashley. "Hi there," Brittany said, her voice carrying a sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. "I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Brittany, and these are my friends Chloe and Ashley. We've been meaning to welcome you to Roosevelt." Madison recognized the calculated nature of the interaction immediately. The timing was deliberate. Enough students were in the hallway to serve as an audience, but not so many that teachers would be actively monitoring the area. The positioning was strategic too, with Brittany directly in front of her while her followers blocked potential escape routes. "Thank you," Madison replied simply, her voice calm and measured. "I'm Madison Chun." "Such a pretty name," Brittany continued, her eyes focusing on Madison's hair with an intensity that made the air feel charged. And your hair is absolutely gorgeous. You must spend hours on it every morning. Madison felt the weight of other students' attention as conversations around them gradually quieted. This was clearly a performance for their benefit, though she couldn't yet understand the purpose. Not really, Madison answered honestly. It's pretty low maintenance. Chloe stepped forward, running her fingers through her own shoulder length. Blonde hair in a gesture that seemed unconsciously jealous. I've been trying to grow mine out for ages, but it just won't get past this length. You're so lucky to have naturally thick hair like that. Madison sensed undercurrents in the conversation that she couldn't quite identify. Her grandfather had taught her to trust her instincts when something felt wrong, and every instinct was telling her to be cautious. Genetics, I guess, Madison sighed, starting to close her locker. Wait, Brittany said, reaching out to gently touch a strand of Madison's hair. The contact was brief, but somehow felt invasive. It's just so silky. What products do you use? I mean, for those of us who weren't blessed with perfect hair, we have to work a little harder. The comment contained just enough self-deprecation to sound innocent while carrying a subtle barb. Madison recognized the technique, compliments designed to make the recipient feel guilty for having something others wanted. Just regular shampoo. Madison replied, stepping back slightly to break the physical contact. Ashley laughed, a sound that carried more edge than humor. Regular shampoo. Come on, you can tell us your secrets. We're all girls here. There really aren't any secrets, Madison said, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. You know, Brittany said, tilting her head as if considering something for the first time. You should totally let me do your hair sometime. I'm actually pretty good at styling. I could show you some really cute ways to wear it that would be more appropriate for Roosevelt. The word appropriate hung in the air like a challenge. Madison understood now that this wasn't really about hair care tips or friendly advice. This was about establishing dominance and finding ways to change her appearance to suit someone else's vision of how she should look. I'm comfortable with how I wear it now, Madison said, her tone remaining polite but firm. Brittany's smile faltered for just a moment before returning with increased brightness. Of course. I just meant that sometimes when you're new somewhere, it helps to fit in a little better. But obviously you do you. The passive-aggressive nature of the comment was clear to everyone listening. Several students had stopped pretending to be busy with their lockers and were openly watching the exchange now. Madison felt a familiar sensation, the same focused calm that came over her during sparring matches at the dojo. Her grandfather had taught her that the most dangerous opponents were often those who smiled while they attacked, who used social conventions as weapons rather than honest aggression. I appreciate the suggestion, Madison said, shouldering her backpack. But I should get to class now. She moved a step around the group, but Brittany shifted slightly to block her path. The movement was subtle enough to appear accidental to casual observers, but Madison recognized it as a deliberate power play. Oh, one more thing, Brittany said, her voice dropping to a more intimate volume. I couldn't help but notice you eating lunch alone every day. That must be really hard, being all by yourself in a new place. If you ever want to sit with us, you're totally welcome. We could help you learn how things work around here. The offer was phrased as kindness, but Madison heard the implied threat beneath it. The message was clear: accept their guidance and supervision, or continue to be isolated and vulnerable. That's thoughtful, Madison replied, but I actually enjoy having quiet time during lunch. It helps me focus on my studies. Chloe exchanged a quick glance with Ashley. Madison's polite but firm rejection of their overtures was clearly not the response they had expected. Studies are important, Brittany agreed, her tone becoming slightly cooler. Though sometimes people who focus too much on studying miss out on other important aspects of high school. Social skills, for instance. Learning how to connect with people, The comment was designed to sting, suggesting that Madison's academic focus came at the cost of normal social development. It was the kind of calculated insult that could be dismissed as helpful advice if challenged directly. Madison felt her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Her grandfather had always emphasized the importance of emotional control, but he had also taught her to recognize when someone was deliberately trying to provoke a reaction. "I've found that genuine connections usually happen naturally," Madison said, her voice remaining steady, "when people have mutual respect and common interests." The response was more pointed than anything Madison had said so far, and Brittany's eyes narrowed slightly. Several students who had been eavesdropping exchanged looks, recognizing that the conversation had shifted from friendly welcome to subtle warfare. "Absolutely," Brittany said, her smile becoming more forced. "Though sometimes people need a little help recognizing what kinds of connections are beneficial. Roosevelt can be tricky to navigate if you don't understand the social dynamics." "I'm sure I'll figure it out," Madison replied, making another attempt to move past the group. This time, Ashley stepped sideways, creating a more obvious barrier. "We're just trying to help," she said, her voice carrying a hint of irritation. Most people would be grateful for advice from students who actually understand how things work here. Madison paused, recognizing that the conversation had reached a decision point. She could continue to deflect and try to extract herself diplomatically, or she could address the underlying hostility more directly. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. "Choose your battles wisely, but never mistake. Avoidance for wisdom when principle is at stake." "I do appreciate that you want to help," Madison said, looking directly at Brittany. "But I'm comfortable making my own decisions about how I present myself and who I spend time with. I hope you can respect that." The directness of the response created a moment of silence in the hallway. Madison had essentially rejected not just their advice, but their implicit authority to give it. Brittany's mask of friendliness finally slipped completely. "Respect," she repeated, her voice carrying a new hardness. "That's interesting. You know, respect is usually something that's earned over time. It's not something you can just demand when you're somewhere." "I agree," Madison said calmly. "Which is why I try to treat everyone with basic courtesy until they give me a reason not to." The implication was clear, and several students who had been listening couldn't hide their reactions. A few suppressed smiles, while others looked nervously between Madison and Brittany, sensing that lines were being drawn. Brittany's cheeks flushed slightly. She had intended to establish her dominance over the new girl through subtle intimidation and social pressure. Instead, she had been politely but firmly rebuffed in front of an audience. "Well," Brittany said, her voice tight with controlled anger, "I hope that attitude works out for you. Roosevelt can be a really welcoming place for people who know how to appreciate friendship when it's offered." The threat was barely veiled now. Madison understood that she had just declined an offer that wasn't really optional in Brittany's mind. "I'm sure it is," Madison replied. "For people who want to be welcomed on those terms." The bell rang, signaling the end of the break period. Students began moving toward their classrooms, but the tension between Madison and Brittany remained thick in the air. "See you around, Madison," Brittany said, her smile returning but carrying none of its earlier warmth. "I'm sure we'll have lots more opportunities to chat." As the group finally stepped aside to let Madison pass, she felt the weight of their stares following her down the hallway. She had successfully avoided being drawn into open conflict, but she had also made it clear that she wouldn't be easily intimidated or controlled. Walking toward her chemistry class, Madison reflected on the encounter. Her grandfather had always taught her that the best victories were those achieved without fighting, where principle was maintained without resorting to aggression. But he had also warned her that sometimes refusing to submit to unreasonable demands only delayed conflict rather than preventing it. Behind her, Brittany watched Madison's retreating figure with calculating eyes. The new girl had been more resistant than expected, but that just meant different strategies would be required. Brittany Walsh had never met a challenge she couldn't overcome, and she wasn't about to start now. The game had begun in earnest, and both participants understood that. The stakes were higher than simple social positioning. This was about respect control, and the question of whether Roosevelt High would continue to operate according to Brittany's carefully maintained rules, or whether someone new might dare to challenge the established order. The escalation began. Subtly, like water slowly rising around Madison's ankles before she realized she was standing in a flood. In the days following their hallway confrontation, Brittany's campaign against her took on a more sophisticated and systematic approach. It started with the photography incident during lunch on Thursday. Madison was sitting in her usual spot in the courtyard, reading a book on Eastern philosophy, when she noticed several students pointing their phones in her direction. At first, she assumed they were taking selfies or photos of each other, but the repeated flashes and whispered conversations made her increasingly uncomfortable. Later that afternoon, she discovered what they had been documenting. Someone had created a social media account called Roosevelt Hair Watch that featured close-up photos of Madison eating, studying, and walking between classes. The captions were cruel in their creativity. "When your hair has more personality than you do. And somebody please tell her this isn't a shampoo commercial. And pa view, you think you're in a fairy tale but you're actually just weird." Madison stared at her phone screen in disbelief. The account had gained 47 followers in just a few hours, and students she had never even spoken to were leaving laughing emojis and adding their own commentary. The violation felt deeply personal, as if strangers had been allowed to rifle through her private possessions. But worse than the photos themselves was the realization that she had been under constant surveillance without knowing it. Every moment she thought she was alone, every private gesture or expression, had potentially been documented and shared for entertainment. When Madison showed the account to her mother that evening, Dr. Chun's expression shifted from concern to anger. "This is harassment," she said firmly. "We need to report this to the school administration immediately." "Please don't," Madison replied quickly. "That will only make it worse. They'll say I can't handle a little teasing, and it will give them more reasons to target me." Dr. Chun studied her daughter's face, recognizing the stubborn determination that Madison had inherited from both sides of her family. "Honey, you don't have to handle this alone. There are adults who can help." "I know," Madison said, though she wasn't entirely convinced. "Let me try to resolve it myself first. If it gets worse, I promise I'll ask for help." The next morning brought a new level of psychological warfare. Madison arrived at school to find that someone had printed out several of the photos from the Hair Watch account and taped them to her locker with additional handwritten comments. Students gathered around to read them, some laughing openly while others looked uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Madison removed the photos methodically, her expression unchanged, but inside she felt something shifting. The public humiliation was designed to make her feel exposed and powerless, and she had to admit it was working. For the first time since arriving at Roosevelt, she found herself considering cutting her hair short just to remove the target from her back. The realization that she was even thinking about changing herself to appease her tormentors made her angry in a way she hadn't expected. Her grandmother's voice seemed to whisper in her memory, "Never let others steal pieces of who you are, little one. What they take, you may never get back." During second period English class, Madison discovered that Brittany's influence extended beyond social media and hallway pranks. Mrs. Patterson assigned group projects for their unit on American literature, and Madison found herself mysteriously excluded from every team formation. As students paired off and formed groups around her, she remained sitting alone, watching the deliberate coordination that left her isolated. "Madison, it looks like you'll be working independently," Mrs. Patterson said, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but unsure how to address it without creating more drama. "That's fine," Madison replied calmly, though she could feel the satisfaction radiating from Brittany's direction. The pattern repeated throughout the day. In the chemistry lab, her assigned partner claimed to feel sick and asked to be moved to a different group. During pay, team captain somehow managed to forget her name during selection, leaving her to work with Mr. Rodriguez as a demonstration partner. In history class, her usual seat was suddenly saved for someone else, forcing her to sit in the front row directly under the teacher's gaze. Each incident seemed minor in isolation, but together, they created a comprehensive campaign of exclusion. Madison realized that Brittany had been busy building alliances and calling in favors, creating a network of students willing to participate in her harassment either actively or through passive compliance. The breakthrough moment came during Friday's lunch period when Madison overheard a conversation that revealed the true scope of what she was facing. She was returning from the library when she heard familiar voices coming from an empty classroom. The door was slightly ajar, and though she knew eavesdropping was wrong, something compelled her to listen. "I don't understand why we're doing all this," a voice she recognized as Chloe's was saying. "She hasn't actually done anything to us." "That's exactly the problem," Brittany's voice replied sharply. "She thinks she can just show up here and be all mysterious and special without paying her dues. Do you see how other students look at her? Like she's some kind of exotic princess or something." "But maybe she's just shy," Ashley suggested hesitantly. "Some people are naturally quiet." Brittany's laugh was cold. "Please, I've seen truly shy people, and they try to blend in. They don't walk around with hair like that, drawing attention and then acting all superior when people notice. She's playing some kind of game, and I'm going to make sure everyone sees through it." "What do you mean?" Chloe asked. "I mean, we're going to strip away all that mystique and show everyone what she really is underneath. Just another insecure teenager who thinks she's better than everyone else. Once people see her break down and react like a normal person, they'll realize there was never anything special about her in the first place." Madison felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just about social positioning or teenage drama. Brittany was conducting a deliberate psychological campaign, designed to break her spirit and force her to abandon the quiet dignity that had become her defining characteristic. "How are we supposed to do that?" Ashley's voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Leave that to me," Brittany said. "I've been watching her for weeks now, and I think I know exactly what buttons to push. The hair is obviously important to her. Probably some cultural thing or family tradition. If we can find a way to mess with that, I guarantee you'll see a very different side of Madison Chun." Madison backed away from the door, her heart pounding. The casual way Brittany had dismissed her cultural heritage as some cultural thing revealed a level of callousness that went beyond typical teenage cruelty. This was personal in a way that transcended normal social conflicts. That afternoon, Madison found herself walking through Roosevelt's halls with new awareness. She noticed how conversations stopped when she approached, how groups of students would turn to stare as she passed, how teachers seemed to look at her with a mixture of sympathy and helplessness. Brittany had successfully turned her into a spectacle, a walking exhibition for other students' entertainment and judgment. The weekend provided temporary relief, but Madison spent most of it preparing for what she sensed was coming. She practiced meditation techniques her grandfather had taught her for managing stress and maintaining focus under pressure. She reviewed the philosophical principles that had guided her training: patience, discipline, respect for others, and the importance of meeting aggression with calm, strength. But she also found herself thinking about other lessons from the dojo. Her grandfather had taught her that there were times when peaceful resolution wasn't possible, when opponents viewed restraint as weakness and escalated their attacks accordingly. In those situations, he had said, the most compassionate response might be to demonstrate strength quickly and decisively, before the conflict could spiral into something more destructive. Monday morning brought confirmation that the campaign against her was entering a new phase. Madison arrived at school to find a group of students gathered around her locker, looking at something that had been attached to the metal door. As she approached, they dispersed quickly, but not before she caught sight of what they had been examining. Someone had created a detailed makeover plan for Madison, complete with before and after photos digitally manipulated to show her with different hairstyles, makeup, and clothing. The document was designed to look like a fashion magazine feature, but the underlying message was clear. She needed to be changed, improved, and made more acceptable to Roosevelt's social standards. Madison removed the papers and threw them away, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The escalation had a momentum of its own now, and she suspected that Brittany's next move would be more direct and potentially more damaging than anything that had come before. During her morning training session at the local dojo before school, Madison found herself working through forms with unusual intensity. Her sensei, Master Williams, noticed the change in her energy and approached her after class. "Something troubling you, Madison?" he asked kindly. Madison hesitated, then shared a brief outline of the situation at school. Master Williams listened thoughtfully, his weathered face grave. "Your grandfather taught you well about avoiding unnecessary conflict," he said finally. "But he also taught you that there are times when conflict chooses us, regardless of our wishes. When that happens, the question isn't whether to respond, but how to respond in a way that honors both strength and principle." As Madison walked toward Roosevelt that morning, Master Williams' words echoed in her mind. She had tried patience, diplomacy, and dignified restraint, but her tormentors had interpreted each response as permission to escalate further. The question now was how much more she was willing to endure before the line between principle and self-preservation became too blurred to distinguish. The attack came during what should have been the safest time of Madison's day. It was Tuesday afternoon, and she had stayed after school to complete a chemistry makeup lab that she had missed due to a doctor's appointment. The science wing was nearly empty, with most students having left for sports practice or after-school jobs. Madison preferred these quiet hours when she could work without the constant awareness of being watched and judged. She was alone in the third-floor girls' bathroom, carefully washing chemical residue from her hands after spending 2 hours analyzing molecular structures. Her long hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she was mentally reviewing the lab results she would need to write up for her report. The bathroom's fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, creating an almost meditative atmosphere. The door opened behind her, but Madison didn't immediately turn around. Students occasionally used this bathroom during after-school activities, and she had learned to ignore casual interruptions. It wasn't until she heard the distinctive click of the door lock engaging that her instincts began to signal danger. Madison looked up into the mirror and felt her blood freeze. Brittany Walsh stood directly behind her, but this wasn't the carefully composed social predator Madison had grown accustomed to facing. Brittany's usually perfect makeup was slightly smudged, her hair disheveled, and her eyes held a wildness that suggested something had pushed her beyond her normal calculated cruelty. "Finally," Brittany said, her voice carrying a breathless excitement. "Just you and me with no audience to perform for." Madison turned slowly, keeping her movements controlled and non-threatening. She could see Ashley and Chloe flanking the door, their faces showing a mixture of excitement and nervousness that made Madison's skin crawl. "The door doesn't need to be locked," Madison said calmly. "Whatever you want to discuss, we can talk about it like civilized people." Brittany laughed, a sound that echoed harshly off the bathroom tiles. "Civilized? That's rich, coming from someone who's been acting like she's too good to even acknowledge the rest of us exist." "I've never acted superior to anyone," Madison replied, though she could feel her heart rate increasing. The enclosed space, the locked door, and the manic energy radiating from Brittany all suggested that this Confrontation would be different from their previous encounters. "Oh, but you have," Chloe said, stepping forward with uncharacteristic boldness. "Walking around with that perfect hair, sitting alone like you're above everyone else. Rejecting our friendship like we're not worth your time," Madison realized. That whatever had triggered this confrontation, it had given Brittany's followers permission to express resentments they had been building for weeks. The usual social constraints that kept their cruelty indirect had been temporarily suspended. "I'm sorry if my behavior has seemed unfriendly," Madison said, trying to de-escalate the situation. "That was never my intention. If you unlock the door, we can go somewhere more appropriate to talk about this." "More appropriate?" Ashley's voice was sharp with mockery. "Like where? The cafeteria where you can ignore us some more? The hallway, where you can give us those polite little responses that make us feel like idiots?" Brittany reached into her purse and pulled out something that made Madison's breath catch in her throat. It was a pair of scissors, not the small safety scissors used in elementary school, but serious sharp crafting shears with long blades that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "You know what I realized today?" Brittany said, holding the scissors casually but deliberately. "All this time, I've been trying to get your attention through social pressure and subtle messages. But maybe what you need is something more direct." Madison's training kicked in automatically. She assessed the space, roughly 8 by 10 feet, with limited room for maneuvering. 3 opponents, but only one armed. Multiple potential weapons within reach if needed, including the heavy soap dispensers and the metal paper towel holder. The locked door was both a trap and a tactical advantage, since it meant no outside interference, but also no escape routes. "Brittany," Madison said, her voice remaining steady despite the adrenaline now coursing through her system. "Whatever you're thinking of doing, it's not worth the consequences. Put the scissors away and let's just talk." "Oh, we're way past talking," Brittany replied, taking a step closer. "Do you know what today is? It's the day I found out that Tyler Morrison asked Emma Rodriguez to the spring dance. Emma Rodriguez, who I've been interested in for months, but who couldn't be bothered to notice me because she's been too busy staring at you and your precious hair during lunch." The revelation hit Madison like a physical blow. This wasn't really about social dynamics or territorial disputes. Brittany's escalating campaign had been fueled by romantic jealousy, and Madison had been completely unaware that Emma, a quiet girl in her P history class, had even noticed her existence. "I didn't know Emma was interested in me," Madison said honestly. "I've never even had a real conversation with her." "Exactly." Brittany's voice rose to near shouting. "You don't even have to try. You just exist with that mysterious act and that ridiculous fairy tale hair, and people fall all over themselves to get your attention. Well, let's see how mysterious you are when you look like everyone else." Brittany lunged forward with the scissors, aiming directly for Madison's ponytail. But Madison's years of training had prepared her for exactly this kind of sudden attack. She twisted sideways, letting Brittany's momentum carry her past, then grabbed her wrist and applied pressure to the nerve point that would force her to drop the scissors. The scissors clattered to the floor, but Brittany's rage only intensified. "Grab her!" she screamed to Ashley and Chloe. "Hold her still." Ashley rushed forward, trying to wrap her arms around Madison's shoulders, but Madison ducked low and swept Ashley's legs, sending her tumbling backward into the wall. Chloe hesitated, suddenly realizing that the situation had escalated far beyond what she had signed up for. "This is crazy," Chloe said, backing toward the door. "Someone's going to get hurt. Someone's going to get what they deserve," Brittany snarled, scrambling for the scissors. Madison found herself facing a decision that her grandfather had warned her might someday come. She could continue to use minimal force, focusing only on defense and de-escalation. But Brittany's determination and the enclosed space made it clear that anything less than decisive action would only prolong the danger and potentially lead to someone getting seriously injured. When Brittany rose with the scissors again, Madison made her choice. She stepped forward instead of back, moving inside Brittany's reach before she could swing the scissors effectively. Her left hand caught Brittany's wrist in an iron grip, while her right hand struck 3 precise pressure points in rapid succession: shoulder, elbow, and wrist. The combination was designed to temporarily disable the arm without causing permanent damage. Brittany screamed as her arm went numb and the scissors fell again. But Madison wasn't finished. Using a technique her grandfather had taught her for controlling larger opponents, she pivoted and applied a joint lock that brought Brittany to her knees, unable to move without causing herself significant pain. "Let me go," Brittany gasped, but her voice now carried more fear than rage. "Are you going to try to hurt me again?" Madison asked calmly. No, I promise." Madison released the hold and stepped back, but remained in a defensive stance. Ashley was still on the floor, holding her ankle and whimpering, while Chloe stood frozen by the door, her face pale with shock. The silence in the bathroom was profound. For weeks, Madison had been a target, a victim, someone to be manipulated and tormented. In the space of 30 seconds, that dynamic had been completely reversed. Brittany struggled to her feet, cradling her arm, her carefully constructed image of power and control shattered. You can't do this to me," she whispered, but the words carried no conviction. "I didn't want to do anything to anyone," Madison replied. "You made this choice when you brought weapons and locked us in here together." "Nobody will believe you," Brittany said desperately. "3 of us against 1 of you. We'll say you attacked us for no reason." Madison pulled out her phone and showed them the screen. "I started recording the moment you pulled out the scissors. Everything that happened here is documented." The blood drained from Brittany's face as she realized the implications. Not only had her plan failed spectacularly, but there was now evidence of her premeditated attack with a weapon. Madison walked to the door and unlocked it, never taking her eyes off the 3 girls. "I'm going to report this to the administration, and probably the police. I'd suggest you use the time before they call you in to think very carefully about whether you want to continue lying about what happened here." As Madison walked out of the bathroom, leaving her would-be attackers to contemplate their situation, she felt a strange mixture of emotions. The immediate threat was over, and she had successfully defended herself without seriously injuring anyone. But she also knew that this incident had irrevocably changed her status at Roosevelt. She was no longer just the quiet new girl who could be targeted with impunity. She was someone who had proven capable of defending herself with potentially dangerous efficiency. And in a school environment where rumors spread faster than wildfire, that revelation would bring its own set of challenges and consequences. Walking down the empty hallway toward the main office, Madison reflected on her grandfather's teaching about the double-edged nature of strength. Once others knew what you were capable of, you could never go back to being underestimated. The question now was whether the respect that came with demonstrated capability would be worth the new kinds of attention and expectations it would bring. The video went viral within hours of Madison uploading it to the school's anonymous tip reporting system. By Wednesday morning, every student at Roosevelt High had seen the 30-second clip that captured Brittany Walsh attacking Madison with scissors, followed by Madison's swift and precise defensive response. The audio was crystal clear, preserving Brittany's threats and Madison's calm attempts at de-escalation. Principal Janet Harrison sat in her office at 7:30 a.m., watching the video for the 5th time while nursing her 2nd cup of coffee. Across from her desk sat Officer Rebecca Martinez from the Portland Police Department's Youth Division, who had been called in to assess whether criminal charges should be filed. "This is unprecedented," Principal Harrison muttered, pausing the video at the moment when Brittany produced the scissors. "In 22 years of education, I've never seen anything quite like this." Officer Martinez nodded grimly. Assault with a weapon, unlawful imprisonment, conspiracy to commit bodily harm. We're looking at serious felony charges for the Walsh girl and her accomplices. The Chun girl, on the other hand, has a textbook case of self-defense. The parents are already calling, Principal Harrison said, gesturing to her phone which had been ringing constantly since 6 a.m. Some demanded that Madison be expelled for violence. Others insisted that Brittany should be arrested immediately. The school board is meeting in an emergency session this afternoon. What neither of them anticipated was how quickly the story would spread beyond Roosevelt's walls. Emma Rodriguez, the girl whose romantic interest had sparked Brittany's jealous rage, had shared the video with her older sister Maria, a journalism student at Portland State University. Maria recognized the broader implications of the story, a systematic bullying campaign that escalated to weapon-based assault, all documented with remarkable clarity. By noon, local news vans were parked outside Roosevelt High, and hashtag Defend Madison was trending on social media platforms across Oregon. Students from other schools began sharing their own stories of bullying incidents, creating a statewide conversation about harassment, self-defense, and institutional failure to protect vulnerable students. Inside Roosevelt's walls, the student body had effectively split into three factions. The largest group consisted of students who had been secretly rooting for Madison throughout her ordeal and now openly celebrated her victory over Brittany's regime. These students began approaching Madison between classes, sharing stories of their own experiences with Brittany's psychological warfare. "She did the same thing to me sophomore year," confided Jamie Chun, no relation, a quiet boy who had transferred from Roosevelt to a private school the previous semester. "She convinced half of our history class that I had cheated on a test, even though it wasn't true. I almost got suspended, and my parents had to hire a lawyer to prove my innocence. I still have screenshots of the group chat where she organized people to exclude me from the winter dance planning committee," added Sarah Kim, a senior who had returned to Roosevelt after hearing about the incident. "She made it seem like a joke, but it was devastating at the time." The second fraction consisted of Brittany's remaining allies, who found themselves in an increasingly untenable position. Many of these students had participated in the harassment campaign against Madison, either actively or through passive compliance, and now faced potential consequences as the administration began investigating the full scope of the bullying. Tyler Morrison, the boy whose romantic interest in Emma had inadvertently triggered the final confrontation, became an unexpected voice for accountability. During lunch on Wednesday, he stood up in the cafeteria and delivered an impromptu speech that was recorded by multiple students. "I need to say something about what happened yesterday," Tyler announced, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet room. "I had no idea that asking Emma to the dance would put Madison in danger, but that's not really the point. The point is that Brittany Walsh has been terrorizing students at this school for years, and most of us just looked the other way because we were afraid of becoming targets ourselves." He gestured toward Madison, who was sitting at her usual table with a small group of supporters. Madison Chun had the courage to stand up for herself when none of us would stand up for her. And now some people want to punish her for defending herself against someone who brought scissors into a locked bathroom. That's insane. The third faction, smaller but more vocal, consisted of students and parents who argued that Madison's response had been excessive and potentially dangerous. They pointed to Ashley's sprained ankle and Brittany's temporarily disabled arm as evidence that Madison was a threat to school safety. This perspective was most forcefully articulated by Brittany's mother, Patricia Walsh, during an emergency school board meeting that evening. Mrs. Walsh, a prominent local attorney, had clearly coached her daughter on how to reframe the incident for maximum sympathy. "My daughter made a mistake," Mrs. Walsh admitted to the packed auditorium. "She was emotionally distraught about a personal situation, and she made a poor decision. But what happened to her in that bathroom was a calculated and disproportionate attack by someone with obvious martial arts training. She gestured to photos of Brittany's bruised arm, taken at the emergency room the night before. Look at these injuries. This wasn't self-defense. It was assault by someone who clearly has the skills and training to seriously hurt other students. How can we allow someone like this to remain in our school? The argument might have gained traction, except for the intervention of Emma Rodriguez herself. Emma, who had been thrust into an unwanted spotlight as the catalyst for the incident, surprised everyone by requesting permission to address the board. "Mrs. Walsh is wrong about Madison," Emma said, her voice shaking but determined. "I've been watching Madison since she started at Roosevelt, and she's never shown any aggression toward anyone. She sits alone at lunch because students like Brittany made it clear she wasn't welcome anywhere else." Emma turned to face the audience, many of whom were seeing her speak publicly for the first time. "You want to know why Tyler asked me to the dance? Because Madison inspired me to stop being invisible. Watching her handle harassment with such dignity made me realize that I didn't have to accept being ignored and overlooked. Tyler noticed me because I started believing I was worth noticing." The impact of Emma's testimony was immediate and powerful. Here was the girl whose romantic situation had allegedly triggered the entire incident, testifying that Madison had been an inspiration rather than a threat. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source: Master Williams. Madison's sensei from the local dojo had been following the news coverage and decided to take action. He contacted Principal Harrison and requested permission to address the ongoing safety concerns about Madison's martial arts training. "I've been teaching martial arts for 30 years, Master Williams explained during a meeting with school administrators and concerned parents on Thursday afternoon. "Madison Chun is one of the most disciplined and ethical students I've ever trained. What she did in that bathroom wasn't excessive force. It was precisely calibrated self-defense." He played the bathroom video again, pausing at key moments to explain Madison's choices. "Watch here. She has multiple opportunities to seriously injure her attackers, but she consistently chooses the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat. She could have broken Brittany's arm easily, but instead applied just enough pressure to make her drop the weapon." Master Williams' analysis revealed details that most viewers had missed. Madison's positioning throughout the encounter was designed to protect her attackers from seriously injuring themselves while still maintaining control of the situation. Her use of pressure points rather than strikes minimized the risk of permanent damage, and her immediate release of holds once compliance was achieved showed remarkable restraint under extreme stress. This young woman probably saved Brittany Walsh from much more serious consequences, Master Williams concluded. If Madison had panicked or lost control, we could be looking at broken bones, concussions, or worse. Instead, we have minor bruises and injured pride. The week culminated in an unprecedented student demonstration on Friday morning. Nearly 300 Roosevelt students gathered in the main courtyard before school, many carrying signs reading, "Defend Madison," "End bullying," and "Heroes don't always wear capes." Madison herself was overwhelmed by the support. She had spent years training to be strong enough to protect herself, but she had never imagined becoming a symbol for others who felt powerless against harassment and intimidation. "I don't want to be famous," Madison told Emma as they watched the demonstration from a classroom window. "I just wanted to go to school without being afraid." "I know," Emma replied, surprised by how comfortable she felt talking to the girl who had inadvertently become the center of her own romantic drama. But sometimes being strong for yourself means being strong for other people too. As the week ended, it was clear that the incident in the bathroom had transformed Roosevelt High in ways that went far beyond the immediate participants. Brittany Walsh had been suspended pending criminal charges and faced potential expulsion. Her support network had collapsed as students who had previously enabled her harassment campaigns began speaking out about their own experiences. More importantly, a new culture was emerging at Roosevelt. Students who had previously suffered in silence were finding their voices. Bystanders were beginning to intervene when they witnessed harassment. And the administration, under intense public scrutiny, was implementing new policies and training. Programs to prevent future incidents. Madison Chun had arrived at Roosevelt, hoping to blend into the background and complete her education quietly. Instead, she had become the catalyst for a fundamental shift in how the school community understood power, responsibility, and the courage required to stand up for what was right. But as she would soon discover, becoming a symbol came with its own set of challenges and dangers. The anonymous threat arrived in Madison's locker on Monday morning, 2 weeks after the bathroom incident. Unlike the previous harassment, this wasn't a product of teenage drama or social politics. The letter was typed, professionally formatted, and carried the weight of adult intervention that made Madison's blood run cold. "Your 15 minutes of fame are over," the message read. "People like you need to understand that there are consequences for embarrassing the wrong families. Some problems can't be solved with karate tricks. Watch your back." Madison showed the letter to Principal Harrison, who immediately contacted the police. Officer Martinez examined the document with growing concern, noting the sophisticated language and implied threat of violence that went far beyond typical school bullying. "This suggests adult involvement," Officer Martinez explained during an unquote emergency meeting with Madison's mother. "The Walsh family has significant connections in Portland's legal and business communities. We're investigating whether Patricia Walsh or her associates might be behind this escalation." Dr. Chun felt a familiar protective fury rising in her chest. "Are you telling me that a grown woman is threatening my daughter because her bratty kid got caught attacking someone with scissors?" "We can't prove anything yet," Officer Martinez replied carefully. "But I'd strongly recommend that Madison vary her routes to school and avoid being alone in isolated areas until we can determine the source of these threats." The situation became more complex when Madison arrived at Roosevelt Tuesday morning to find protesters gathered outside the main entrance. But these weren't students supporting her cause. They were adults, many holding professionally printed signs reading, "Expel violent students," and "Our children deserve safe schools." Margaret Foster, a local parent whose children attended Roosevelt, served as the group's spokesperson. She had been recruited by Patricia Walsh to organize what they termed a safety demonstration, though Madison quickly recognized it as an orchestrated intimidation campaign. "We're not here to attack Madison Chun personally," Mrs. Foster announced to the local news cameras that had gathered to cover the protest. "But we have serious concerns about allowing students with advanced fighting skills to remain in regular classrooms. This girl seriously injured 3 other students. What happens next time someone accidentally bumps into her in the hallway?" The narrative was carefully crafted to frame Madison as an ongoing threat rather than a victim who had defended herself. The protesters had been coached to emphasize safety concerns and parental rights, while avoiding direct criticism that might generate sympathy for Madison. Inside the school, Madison found herself facing a new kind of isolation. While many students still supported her, others had been influenced by their parents' concerns about her presence. Teachers looked at her with uncertainty, unsure how to interact with someone who had become a controversial public figure. The breaking point came during the third period when Madison was called to the main office over the intercom. As she walked through the hallways, she noticed students pointing and whispering with an intensity that felt different from the previous week's admiration. In the office, Madison found herself facing the crisis she hadn't anticipated. Principal Harrison was flanked by 2 school board members, the district's legal counsel, and a woman Madison didn't recognize who introduced herself as Dr. Angela Torres from the district's Psychological Services Division. "Madison, we need to discuss some concerns that have been raised about your continued enrollment at Roosevelt." Principal Harrison began, her voice carefully neutral. There have been requests for a psychological evaluation to assess whether you pose a risk to other students. Madison felt her stomach drop. A psychological evaluation? Because I defended myself from someone who attacked me with scissors? Dr. Torres leaned forward, her manner professional but invasive. Madison, your response in that bathroom, while technically legal, demonstrated a level of physical capability that some people find concerning. We need to ensure that you have adequate emotional regulation skills to handle conflicts without resorting to violence. I didn't resort to violence, Madison replied, struggling to keep her voice level. I was attacked with a weapon in a locked room. I used the minimum force necessary to protect myself. That's certainly one interpretation, said Robert Kellerman, the district's legal counsel. But the reality is that 3 students required medical attention after their encounter with you. The optics are challenging, regardless of the legal merits of your actions. Madison realized she was facing something far more sophisticated than teenage bullying. This was institutional pressure designed to remove her from Roosevelt without the school having to take a clear position on whether her actions had been justified. Are you expelling me? Madison asked directly. We're offering you alternatives, Principal Harrison replied carefully. Transfer to Lincoln High, where you could start fresh without the baggage of recent events. Or online schooling through the district's virtual academy. We could even arrange for you to finish the semester at home and re-enroll in the fall. Dr. Chun's voice cut through the room like a blade. You're punishing my daughter for being the victim of an assault. Madison turned to see her mother standing in the doorway, having arrived after receiving an urgent call from Officer Martinez. Dr. Chun, I appreciate your concern, Dr. Torres said smoothly, but we're simply trying to find a solution that works for everyone involved. Everyone except Madison, Dr. Chun replied coldly. You're asking her to give up her education and social connections because other people are uncomfortable with the fact that she can defend herself. What happened next surprised everyone in the room. Emma Rodriguez appeared beside Dr. Chun, followed by Tyler Morrison, Jamie Chun, Sarah Kim, and nearly a dozen other students who had somehow learned about the meeting. Where Madison goes, we go, Emma announced, her quiet voice carrying more authority than anyone expected. If you transfer her for defend herself, you're telling every victim of bullying at this school that fighting back will only make things worse. Tyler stepped forward, his athlete's confidence lending weight to his words. This whole thing started because I asked Emma to a dance, and Brittany Walsh couldn't handle it. Now you want to punish Madison for the consequences of someone else's jealousy? That's not justice, that's cowardice. The students had clearly organized this intervention, but what made it powerful was their obvious sincerity. These weren't Madison's friends rallying to support her, they were fellow students who recognized that her treatment would set a precedent for how victims would be handled in the future. Master Williams' arrival added another layer of complexity to the situation. He entered the office carrying a folder of documents and wearing the kind of expression that made experienced administrators nervous. I represent the Pacific Northwest Martial Arts Association, he announced, and we're prepared to take legal action if Madison Chun is punished for defending herself in a manner consistent with proper self-defense training. He placed the folder on Principal Harrison's desk. These are statements from 15 martial arts instructors across Oregon, all confirming that Madison's actions were textbook examples of appropriate force in a life-threatening situation. We're also prepared to provide expert testimony about the level of restraint she demonstrated. Mr. Kellerman opened the folder and scanned the documents, his expression growing increasingly uncomfortable. The martial arts community had clearly mobilized in support of Madison, creating potential legal complications that the district hadn't anticipated. But the most dramatic moment came when Brittany Walsh herself appeared in the office doorway. She looked dramatically different from the confident bully who had terrorized Madison weeks earlier. Her arm was still in a sling, her face was pale, and her eyes held the hollow look of someone who had finally grasped the full consequences of her actions. "I need to say something," Brittany announced, ignoring her mother's frantic attempts to stop her. "This whole thing is my fault. Madison didn't do anything wrong. I planned the attack. I brought the scissors. I locked the door. She just defended herself." The silence in the room was profound. Patricia Walsh stood behind her daughter, her face a mask of barely controlled fury at this public confession that undermined weeks of careful legal maneuvering. "Brittany," Mrs. Walsh said sharply, "you don't need to say anything else." "Yes, I do," Brittany replied, her voice growing stronger. "I've been watching the news, seeing people call Madison dangerous and violent, and it's not true. I'm the one who escalated everything. I'm the one who turned high school drama into something that could have seriously hurt people." She looked directly at Madison for the first time since the bathroom incident. "I was jealous, and I was angry, and I wanted to hurt you. But you didn't hurt me back, even when you could have. You stopped me from doing something even worse to myself." The confession had an immediate impact on everyone present. Dr. Torres closed her folder of psychological evaluation forms. Mr. Kellerman began gathering the transfer documents. Principal Harrison leaned back in her chair, clearly recognizing that the meeting had taken an unexpected turn. But outside the office, a new crisis was developing. The morning's protests had attracted counter-protesters, and the situation in front of Roosevelt High was rapidly deteriorating. Parents on both sides of the controversy were arguing loudly. Media crews were documenting everything, and school security was struggling to maintain order. Officer Martinez's radio crackled with updates about the escalating situation outside. "We need to make a decision quickly," she told the group assembled in the office. "This controversy is drawing attention from groups that have nothing to do with school safety. I'm seeing vehicles with out-of-state plates and people who definitely aren't parents." As if summoned by her words, the sound of breaking glass echoed from somewhere in the building. Emergency alarms began blaring, and the school's PA system crackled to life with instructions for lockdown procedures. The lockdown announcement sent the office into controlled chaos. Dr. Torres immediately began implementing emergency protocols, while Mr. Kellerman started making urgent phone calls to district supervisors. Through the office windows, they could see students in the hallways moving quickly toward designated safe areas, their faces showing confusion and fear. Officer Martinez received rapid-fire updates through her radio. Multiple incidents reported. The dispatcher's voice crackled. Vandalism to student vehicles in the parking lot. Confrontation between adult protesters requiring police intervention, and unconfirmed reports of someone attempting to enter the building through a side entrance. Madison felt a crushing weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. All of this chaos, all of these frightened students, all of these disrupted lives, it had started with her decision to defend herself in a bathroom. She wondered if she should have just let Brittany cut her hair, avoided the conflict, accepted the humiliation to prevent this escalation. Master Williams seemed to read her thoughts. "This isn't your fault, Madison," he said firmly. "What's happening out there is the result of adults behaving worse than children. You defended yourself appropriately. What others have chosen to do with that information is not your responsibility." But the guilt continued to gnaw at her as more reports filtered in. 3 news vans had their windows broken by unknown individuals. Parents were screaming at each other in the parking lot, while their children watched from classroom windows. Social media was exploding with competing hashtags. Hashtag Defend Madison, hashtag School Safety, hashtag Expel Violence, and hashtag Justice for All. Dr. Chun moved closer to her daughter, her medical training automatically assessing Madison's stress levels. She could see the toll this was taking, the tight shoulders, the controlled breathing. The way Madison's hands remained perfectly still despite the chaos around them. It was the posture of someone using every ounce of training to maintain control. "We're leaving," Dr. Chun announced suddenly. "This has gone far enough. Madison, get your things. We're transferring you to Lincoln High immediately." "No," Madison said quietly, but with unmistakable firmness. "That's exactly what they want. If I run now, it proves that the system works, that if you make enough noise and cause enough problems, you can drive out anyone who doesn't fit your narrative." Emma stepped forward, surprising everyone by taking Madison's hand. "She's right. This isn't about Madison anymore. It's about whether Roosevelt High is going to be a place where students can defend themselves, or whether we're going to teach kids that fighting back only makes things worse." The gesture was simple, but it carried profound meaning. Emma Rodriguez, the quiet girl whose romantic situation had inadvertently sparked this entire crisis, was publicly declaring her support for Madison in front of school administrators, her peers, and her own parents. Tyler Morrison nodded in agreement. Madison didn't ask for any of this. She just wanted to go to school without being terrorized. If we let them drive her out now, we're basically telling every bully in the district that they just need to escalate far enough and their victims will be removed for them. Sarah Kim, who had returned to Roosevelt specifically to support Madison, added her voice to the growing chorus. "I left this school because of Brittany Walsh's harassment. I thought getting away would solve the problem. But the problem isn't specific students. It's a system that protects bullies and punishes their victims. Madison has given us a chance to change that system." Principal Harrison looked around the room, her administrative instincts warring with her personal convictions. She had been an educator for over 2 decades, and she had seen countless situations where doing the politically safe thing ultimately served no one's interests. The radio chatter provided an unwelcome interruption. "We've got a bigger problem," Officer Martinez announced, her face grim as she listened to updates. "Someone called in a bomb threat to the school. We need to evacuate immediately." The words hit the room like a physical blow. A bomb threat represented an escalation beyond anything anyone had anticipated. This was no longer about teenage drama or even community controversy. This was about adults willing to terrorize an entire school to make their point. "Is it credible?" Dr. Torres asked her. "Emergency training taking over. All threats are treated as credible until proven otherwise," Officer Martinez replied. "Bomb squad is en route, but we need to get everyone out of the building now." As alarms began blaring throughout Roosevelt High, Madison felt a strange sense of clarity settling over her. She had been trained since childhood to remain calm in crisis situations, to think clearly when others panicked, to take responsibility for protecting those around her who might be vulnerable. "The elementary school next door," Madison said suddenly. "If someone really wanted to cause maximum damage and get media attention, they wouldn't target a high school where everyone can evacuate quickly. They'd target the younger kids who might panic." Officer Martinez's eyes widened as she grasped the implication. Roosevelt High shared a campus complex with Washington Elementary, and the schools were connected by a covered walkway that was often used for joint activities. "Get me the elementary school principal on the phone," Officer Martinez barked at Principal Harrison. "And dispatch, I need units at Washington Elementary immediately." As the evacuation proceeded with practiced efficiency, Madison found herself walking beside Brittany Walsh. The other girl was crying silently, her mother nowhere to be seen in the controlled chaos of students and faculty moving toward the athletic fields that served as the designated assembly area. "I'm sorry," Brittany whispered, barely audible over the sound of sirens and evacuation announcements. "I never wanted it to go this far. I was so angry and jealous. And I thought if I could just make you look foolish, everyone would see that you weren't special." Madison looked at her former tormentor, seeing not the calculating bully who had terrorized her for weeks, but a frightened teenager who had lost control of forces she never understood. "I know," Madison replied simply. "But this isn't your fault either. Adults took our conflict and turned it into something none of us could have predicted." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of federal agents. The bomb threat had triggered protocols that brought in resources from multiple agencies, and the scope of the investigation was expanding rapidly. Madison realized with growing alarm that she was no longer just a high school student involved. In a bullying incident, she had become the focal point of something that was attracting national attention. Agent Jennifer Walsh, no relation to Brittany's family, approached Madison and her mother as they reached the assembly area. "Miss Chun, we need to ask you some questions about the threats you've been receiving. We have reason to believe this incident may be connected to organized harassment rather than a random bomb threat." "Organized harassment?" Dr. Chun's voice carried the sharp edge of a mother whose patience had been exhausted. "Are you telling me that adults planned this to terrorize my daughter?" "We're investigating several possibilities," Agent Walsh replied carefully. "But we've identified social media coordination and funding sources that suggest this isn't a grassroots community response. Someone with significant resources has been amplifying the controversy and organizing opposition to your daughter's presence at this school." The revelation hit Madison like a physical blow. She had assumed that the protests and pressure were the result of legitimate parental concerns and community debate. The possibility that she had been targeted by a coordinated campaign orchestrated by unknown adults was both terrifying and infuriating. Master Williams, who had been quietly observing the federal agent's arrival, approached the group with a grim expression. "Madison, there's something you need to know. I've been receiving calls from martial arts schools across the country. This story has gone national, and there are groups trying to use it to promote their political agendas." He showed her his phone, displaying news headlines from major media outlets. "High school martial artist fights back against bullies. When self-defense becomes controversial, the politics of school violence prevention." Each article framed the story differently, but all of them focused on Madison as a symbol rather than a person. "Some groups want to use you as an example of why students should be trained in self-defense," Master Williams explained. "Others want to use you as proof that martial arts training makes students dangerous. Neither side is particularly interested in what actually happened or what you want for your own life." Emma Rodriguez, who had been listening to the conversation, stepped closer to Madison. "That's exactly why you can't let them drive you away from Roosevelt. The moment you transfer schools or disappear from public view, they'll all create their own narratives about what your story means. But if you stay and finish high school here, you get to show them what really happened, that you're just a normal student who defended herself and wants to get on with her education." The sound of helicopters overhead added another layer of surreal atmosphere to the situation. News crews were documenting everything from the air, creating footage that would be broadcast across the country within hours. Madison realized that no matter what decisions she made in the coming days, millions of people would have opinions about her choices. Agent Walsh returned with updates that cast the entire situation in a new light. "The bomb threat was called in from a prepaid phone purchased with cash in Seattle," she reported. "We're also tracking unusual traffic patterns on social media, artificial amplification of certain hashtags, and coordinated posting schedules that suggest professional social media manipulation." Dr. Chun processed this information with growing anger. Someone is paying to terrorize students and teachers because they don't like the outcome of a bullying incident. What kind of people do that? The kind who see teenage conflicts as opportunities to advance their political agenda, Agent Walsh replied grimly. "We're investigating connections to several groups that specialize in turning local incidents into national controversies for fundraising and attention purposes." As bomb-sniffing dogs completed their search of the school buildings and gave the all-clear, students began the process of returning to classes. But the atmosphere at Roosevelt High had been permanently altered. Everyone understood that they were no longer dealing with internal school issues, but with forces that viewed their education and safety as acceptable casualties in larger political battles. Madison walked back toward the school building, surrounded by her new allies and shadowed by federal agents. She had started the day facing the possibility of forced transfer or psychological evaluation. Now she was at the center of a federal investigation into organized harassment and domestic terrorism threats. The girl who had simply wanted to honor her grandmother's memory by keeping her hair long had become a reluctant symbol in battles she never chose and didn't fully understand. But as she looked around at the faces of her fellow students, some supportive, some uncertain, some still hostile, she realized that her choices in the coming days would affect far more than her own future. Madison Chun, who had simply wanted to finish high school quietly, found herself at the center of a crisis that had spiraled far beyond anything she could have imagined. The question now wasn't whether she would be allowed to stay at Roosevelt High, but whether anyone would be safe there as long as the controversy continued to escalate, and whether she had the strength to become the symbol others needed her to be, even if it meant sacrificing the quiet life she had always preferred. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.